Sholem Aleichem was read and admired by Tolstoy and Chekhov and by hundreds of thousands of newspaper readers who pored over his weekly installments.
He wrote about the uncomfortable pull of progress against the impossibility of the status quo, as in this story called The Clock, read by Theresa, Tova.
The clock struck 13. That's the truth. I wasn't joking. I'm telling you a true story of what happened in Kasrilivske, in our own house. I was there. We had a hanging clock. It was an ancient clock that my grandfather had inherited from his father and his father's father, straight back to the days of Count Khmelnytsky. What a pity that a clock is a lifeless thing, mute and without speech. Otherwise, what stories it could have told and told. It had a name throughout the town, Reb Nochem's clock, so unfaltering and true in its course that men came from all directions to set their own clocks and watches by it. Only Reb Leibish Akaron, a man of learning and philosophy who could tell time by the sun and knew the almanac by heart, said that our clock was next to his little watch just so much tin and hardware, not worth a pinch of snuff. But even he had to admit that it was still a clock. And you must remember that Reb Leibish was the man who, every Wednesday night, climbed to the roof of the synagogue or to the hilltop nearby before the evening prayers to catch the exact moment when the sun went down. In one hand his watch, in the other his almanac. And just as the sun sank below the housetops, he tuttered to himself, on the dot. He was always comparing the two timepieces. Walking in without so much as a good evening, he would glance up at our hanging clock, then down at his little watch, then over to his almanac, and again at our clock, then down to his watch, over to the almanac several times. And away he went. Only one day, when he came in to compare the two timepieces with his almanac, he let out a yell, "Nochem, quick, where are you?" My father, more dead than alive, came running. "What happened? Reb Leibish?" "You are asking me?" shouted Reb Leibish, raising his little watch right up to my father's face and pointing with his other hand up to our clock. "Nochem, why don't you say something? Can't you see? It's a minute and a half fast, a minute and a half. Cast out the thing." He hurled the words like an angered prophet with a base image before him. My father did not like this at all. What did he mean, telling him to cast the clock out? "Where is it written, Reb Leibish, that my clock is a minute and a half fast? Maybe we can read the same sentence backward, that your watch is a minute and a half slow. How do you like that?" Reb Leibish looked at my father as at a man who had just said that the Sabbath comes twice a week, or that the Day of Atonement falls on Passover. Reb Leibish didn't say a word. He sighed deeply, turned around, slammed the door, and away he went. But we didn't care. The whole town knew that Reb Leibish was a man whom nothing could please. The best cantor you ever heard sounded like a crow. The wisest man was an ass. The best marriage, a failure. The cleverest epigram, a dull commonplace. But let us return to our clock. What a clock that was. Its chimes could be heard 3 doors away. Boom, boom, boom. Almost half of the town ordered its life according to it. And what is Jewish life without a clock? How many things there are that must be timed to the minute. The lighting of the Shabbos candles, the end of the Shabbos, the daily prayers, the salting and the soaking of the meat, the intervals between meals. In short, our clock was the town clock. It was always faithful to us and to itself. In all its existence, it never knew a repairman. My father himself was its only master. He had an intuitive understanding of how it worked. Every year before Passover, he carefully removed it from the wall, cleaned the insides with a feather duster, took out from within a mass of spider webs, mutilated flies, which the spiders had lured inside, along with dead cockroaches that had lost their way and had met their sad fate there. Then, cleaned and sparkling, he hung the clock on the wall again, and it glowed. That is, they both glowed. The clock, because it had been polished and cleaned, and my father, because the clock did. But there came a day when a strange thing happened. It was on a beautiful, cloudless day when we were sitting at the noonday meal. Whenever the clock struck, I liked to count the strokes, and I did it out loud. 1, 2, 3, 7, 11, 12, 13? What? 13? 13? Cried my father and burst out laughing. Oh, a fine mathematician you are. May the evil eye spare you. Who ever heard of a clock striking 13? 13, I said. On my word of honor, 13. I'll give you 13 smacks, cried my father, aroused. Don't ever repeat such nonsense. Fool! A clock can't strike 13. Do you know what? My mother broke in. I'm afraid that the child is right. It seems to me that I counted 13 too. Wonderful, said my father. Another village heard from. But at the same time, he too began to suspect something. After dinner, he went to the clock, climbed on a stool, and prodded around inside until the clock began to strike. All three of us counted, nodding our heads at each stroke. 1, 2, 3, 7, 9, 11, 12, 13. 13, repeated my father with a look in his eye of a man who had just beheld the wall itself come to life and start talking. He prodded once more at the wheels. Once more, the clock struck 13. My father climbed down from the stool, pale as a sheet, and remained standing in the middle of the room, looking down at the floor, chewing his beard and muttering to himself. It struck 13. How is that? What does it mean? If it was out of order, it would have stopped. What then? What then? Said my mother. Take down the clock and fix it. After all, you're the expert. Well, agreed my father, maybe you're right. And taking down the clock, he busied himself with it. He sweated over it. He worked all day over it. And at last hung it back in its place. Oh, thank the Lord. The clock ran as it should. And when midnight came, we stood around it and counted each stroke till 12. My father beamed at us. Well, he said, no more 13. I've always said you were an expert, my mother said. But there is one thing I don't understand. Why does it wheeze? It never used to wheeze like this before. You're imagining it, my father said. But listening carefully, we heard the clock wheeze when it got ready to ring. Like an old man catching his breath before he coughs. And then the boom, boom, boom. But even the boom itself was not the boom of olden days. The old boom had been a happy one, a joyous one. And now something sad had crept in. A sadness like that in the song of an old worn-out cantor towards the end of the Day of Atonement. As time went on, the wheezing became louder and the ringing more subdued and mournful, and my father became melancholy. We could see him suffering as though he watched a live thing in agony and could do nothing to help it. It seemed as though at any moment the clock would stop altogether. The pendulum began to act strangely. Something shivered inside. Something got caught and dragged like an old man dragging a bad leg. We could see the clock getting ready to stop forever. But just in time, My father came to the decision there was nothing wrong with the clock itself. What was wrong was the weight. Not enough weight. And so he fastened to the weight the pestle of my mother's mortar, a matter of several pounds. The clock began to run like a charm, and my father was happy again, a new man. But it didn't take long. Again, the clock began to fail. Again, the pendulum began to act strangely, swinging sometimes fast, sometimes slow. It was heartrending. It tore you apart to see the clock languish before your eyes. And my father, watching it, dropped also, lost interest in life, suffered anguish. Like a good doctor devoted to his patient, considering every known treatment or possible remedy, my father tried every way imaginable to save the clock. Not enough weight, not enough life, said my father, and attached to the weight more and more objects. First an iron frying pan, then a copper pitcher, then a flat iron, a bag of sand, a couple of bricks. Now, each time the clock drew fresh life and began to run, painfully, with convulsions. But it worked, till one night when a catastrophe took place. It was a Friday night in winter. We had just eaten the Shabbos meal of delicious spicy fish with horseradish, fat chicken soup with noodles, pot roast with prunes and potatoes, and it said the grace that such a meal deserved. The candles were still flickering. The servant girl had just brought in the freshly roasted sunflower seeds when in came Muma Yente, a toothless, dark-skinned little woman whose husband had abandoned her years ago and gone off to America. Good Shabbos, said Muma Yente, breathless as usual. I just knew you'd have sunflower seeds. The only trouble is, what can I crack them with? May my old man have as few years to live as I have teeth in my mouth. She went on, faster and faster. I can still smell your fish, Malke. What a time I had getting fish this morning with that Sure Perl, the millionaire standing next to me at the market. I was just saying to Menashe the fishman, why is everything so high today? When Sure Perl jumps up with, quick, I'm in a hurry. How much does this pickerel weigh? What's your rush, I say to her. The town isn't on fire. Menashe won't throw the fish back in the river. Among the rich, I let them know there's plenty of money, but not much sense. Then she goes on and opens her mouth at me. Paupers, says she, shouldn't come around here if you have no money. You shouldn't hanker after things. What do you think of her nerve? What was she before she married? A peddler herself, standing in her mother's stall at the market. She caught her breath and went on. These people and their marriages, just like Abraham's Pesel Pesach, who's so delighted with her daughter just because she married a rich man from Strich, who took her just as she stood without dowry. Wonderful luck she has. They say she's getting to look a sight. The life those children lead her. Well, what do you think? It's so easy to be a stepmother. God forbid. Look at that. Chava, for instance, a good, well-meaning soul like that. But you should see the trouble she has with her stepchildren. The screaming you hear day and night, the way they talk back to her. And what's worse, pitch-potch, 3 smacks for a penny. The candles begin to gutter. The shadows tremble on the walls. They mount higher and higher. The sunflower seeds crackle. All of us are talking, telling stories to the company at large with no one really listening. But Muma Yente talks more than anybody. Listen to this, she lets out. There's something even worse than all the rest. Not far from Yampula, a couple of miles, some robbers attacked a Jewish tavern the other night, killed everyone in the family, even an infant in a cradle. The only one left was a servant girl asleep on top of the oven in the kitchen. She heard the shrieks. She jumped down from the oven and, looking through a crack in the door, saw the master and mistress lying murdered on the floor in a pool of blood. She took a chance, this servant girl, and jumped out the window, running all the way to town, yelling, "Children of Israel, save us! Help, help, help!" Suddenly, in the midst of Muma Yente's yelling, "Help, help," we hear a crash, bang, smash, boom, bam. Immersed in the story, all we think was that robbers were attacking our own home and were shooting at us from all sides, or that the room had fallen in, or a hurricane had hit us. We couldn't move from our seats. We stared at each other, speechless, waiting. Then all of us began to yell, "Help! Help! Help!" In a frenzy, my mother caught me in her arms, pressed me to her heart, and cried, "My child, if it's going to happen, let it happen to me. Oi, oi." "What? What is it?" cries my father. "What happened to him?" "It's nothing, nothing," yells Mama Yenta, waving her arms. "Be quiet." And the girl runs in from the kitchen, wild-eyed. "What's the matter? What happened? Is there a fire? Where is it?" "Fire? What fire?" shouts Mama Yenta at the girl. "Go burn if you want to. Get scorched if you like." She keeps scolding the girl as if it's all her fault, and then turns to us. "What are you making this racket for? What are you frightened of? What do you think it is? Can't you see? It's just the clock. The clock fell down. Now do you know? Everything you could imagine was hung on it, a half-ton at least. So it fell down. What's strange about that? You wouldn't have been any better yourself." At last we come to our senses. We get up from the table one by one, go up to the clock, and inspect it from all sides. And there it lies, face down, broken, shattered, smashed, ruined forever. "It's all over," says my father in a dull voice, his head bent as if standing before the dead. He wrings his hands and tears appear in his eyes. I look at him and I want to cry too. "Shh, hush, be quiet," says my mother. Why do you grieve? Perhaps it was destined. Maybe it was written in heaven that today, at this minute, the end should come. Let it be an atonement for our sins, though I should not mention it on the Shabbos, for you, for me, for our children, for our loved ones, for all of Israel. Amen. Selah. All that night I dreamed of clocks. I imagined that I saw our old clock lying on the ground, clothed in a white shroud. I imagined that I saw the clock still alive, but instead of a pendulum, there swung back and forth a long tongue, a human tongue, and the clock did not ring, but groaned, and each groan tore something out of me. And on its face, where I used to see the 12, I saw suddenly number 13. Yes, 13. You may believe me, on my word of honor.